Imagine dropping a 12-year-old, like right into the middle of a simulated Alaskan field station.
Oh man, just totally isolated.
Exactly. And you hand them a broken artificial intelligence, point to this collapsing ecological system, and you essentially tell them that the fate of this entire environment relies on them.
Right, relying on them solving a problem they've never even been taught how to solve.
Yes. There are no heavy textbooks here. There's no Friday vocabulary quiz.
No multiple choice tests.
None of that. Just, raw data, environmental clues, and their own intuition.
Which honestly sounds like the plot of a video game.
It really does.
Yeah.
But entire state educational systems are quietly making this the actual new reality for science education. So welcome to the deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Today we are exploring a massive, and I mean fundamental, paradigm shift in how science is practiced and taught. We're moving away from that old rote memorization and, well, stepping into this immersive, evidence-based process called sense-making.
It really is a remarkable shift, and the sources we're analyzing today, they give us a really comprehensive look at this change.
Yeah. What are we looking at exactly?
So we have state-level policy documents from these broad science curriculum projects, places like Nebraska and Alaska.
Okay.
But to really understand how this works on the ground, we also have this fascinating, highly detailed set of materials from a 7th grade immersive curriculum called Bioforge.
Bioforge. And while Bioforge is built for middle schoolers, this deep dive is really about you, the listener.
Absolutely.
Because think about how you tackle a complex problem in your own life or, at work. When a major project derails, you don't pull out a textbook to find the answer.
Right. You'd look crazy doing that.
Yeah, you look at the data, you talk to your team, you form this messy theory, and you iterate.
Mhm.
And this curriculum is essentially teaching 12-year-olds how to do exactly that.
Precisely. And this documentation, it really reveals a fundamental truth about how human beings actually build trustworthy knowledge in a really complex world.
It totally dismantles our traditional static view of learning, doesn't it?
It does, and it completely shatters that cultural myth of the lone genius just, making discoveries in isolation.
Okay, so let's unpack this. We kind of have to start at the macro level to understand how entire educational systems are restructuring what it actually means to know something.
Right, the state-level frameworks.
Yeah. In those state frameworks, they talk about a core philosophy called three-dimensional learning. And, in the older script of education, a dimension of learning was just memorizing a fact.
Like gravity pulls things down.
Exactly. So how does three-dimensional learning actually change that?
Well, it changes it by demanding action. In this new framework, which is tied to the next generation science standards, you can't just memorize a core scientific idea. You have to combine it with a specific practice. So like developing a mathematical model or designing an experiment yourself.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and then you have to run it through what they call a cross-cutting concept.
Which, to be honest, sounds like a bit of educational jargon.
It does. It really does.
So what is a cross-cutting concept in plain English?
Think of it as the universal rules of the game.
Like what?
Cause and effect, for example, or the concept of scale and proportion. These are rules that apply whether you are looking at how a single human cell divides or, how an entire galaxy spins.
Okay, I get that.
So under this new framework, you aren't just reciting a definition. You're taking a core idea, applying a scientific practice to it, and viewing it through a universal rule.
And what really struck me in the source materials is how they get students to do this. I mean, they don't just assign a chapter on chemical reactions.
No, not at all.
The learning is entirely anchored in a specific real-world phenomena, like it's an observable event that begs for an explanation.
Right. The phenomenon drives the questions for the entire unit. It basically creates the friction.
And the examples are fantastic. In one unit, the phenomenon is just baking soda bread.
Literally just bread.
Yeah. Students compare a loaf of bread baked with baking soda to a dense, flat bread baked without it. And their whole mission is to explain mechanically what happened in that oven.
Which is such a smart entry point into chemical leavening agents and the conservation of mass.
Exactly. And in another example, they use an owl pellet to map out an entire ecosystem. Or, they use a photograph of the James Webb Space Telescope to anchor a unit on orbital mechanics.
Right, so you aren't just memorizing mass equations. You're looking at a multi-billion-dollar piece of hardware floating in the void and asking, well, how is that not falling down?
It's so cool.
What's fascinating here is how this completely breaks the traditional assessment model, too.
How so?
Well, if you are teaching through phenomena, you can't test a student's understanding with a standard multiple choice question. You can't just ask, which of the following is the formula for gravity?
Oh, right, because that defeats the whole purpose.
Exactly. So the assessments have evolved into these complex tasks designed to create well, they call it a chain of student sense-making, usually with 3 to 5 interrelated prompts.
I really want to dig into that because the fifth grade task I saw in the files completely blew my mind in terms of how it works.
The one about the stars.
Yes, the task is about understanding the apparent motion of the Big Dipper constellation around Polaris, the North Star.
It is a brilliant example of demanding actual cognitive deduction from a student.
Because in a traditional setting, you just, look at a diagram of the stars in summer, fall, winter, and spring, and you'd memorize it.
Sure, you just memorize the visual map.
But this task gives students an incomplete map. It only shows the Big Dipper's position in the summer.
And then it gives them 2 cultural artifacts to figure the rest out.
Yes. First, clues from the historical song Follow the Drinking Gourd. And second, a traditional story shared by the Micmac and the Iroquois people about the Big Bear.
And this is where the actual mechanism of sense-making really kicks in, because the indigenous story isn't just there for flavor.
Right.
It contains crucial data. The story describes 7 hunters chasing a bear, and as the seasons change and fall approaches, the star representing the hunters literally dips below the horizon line.
Wow.
Yeah, and in late fall, the bear is wounded, and the Big Dipper is no longer visible in the sky. Then, in the spring, a new bear leaves the den, and the constellation reappears.
So the student has to take that narrative data and translate it into spatial data.
Exactly.
They look at the story, realize that in winter the bear is in the den, which means the stars must be dipping below their visual horizon line on the graph.
Yep.
They use a cultural story to mechanically deduce the geometric position of the stars, and they have to actually draw it in themselves.
By integrating indigenous knowledge and historical context, the framework proves that observing the natural world is a deeply human, cross-cultural endeavor. The data is all around us, embedded in history and art just as much as mathematics.
It's kind of like navigating a new city. The old way of teaching science was like handing someone a static map and telling them to memorize the street names before they were allowed to go outside.
Right.
This new method is like handing them a compass, dropping them in the middle of a neighborhood, and just saying, hey, figure out how to get downtown.
That's exactly the cognitive shift. You still have the compass, those core disciplinary ideas, but you have to actively navigate the phenomenon.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is that the curriculum developers know this is a tough transition, even for the families at home.
Oh, I bet parents are so confused by this at first.
Oh, definitely. So the documents actually include parent guides with QR codes for specific family resources.
Oh, that's smart.
Yeah, if a student is struggling with a concept, the parent scans the code, and it doesn't give the parent the answer.
It doesn't.
No, it gives the parent a question to ask their kid. Like, how does a shark tooth end up embedded in a rock in the Midwest?
I love that. It invites the family into the navigation process instead of just giving them an answer key. Okay, conceptually, I love the compass analogy.
Yeah.
It makes sense to let people navigate and figure things out, but practically,
Yeah.
when you are navigating a city without a map, you hit dead ends. Like if I'm a student trying to figure out chemical reactions based on bread, and I decide the bread rose because of, I don't know, tiny invisible bakers,
Right.
I'm just wrong. So how does this curriculum handle those inevitable errors?
This is where we have to look at the 7th grade life science misconception map.
Okay, what is that?
This document completely reframes the whole concept of failure. Misconceptions are no longer viewed as wrong answers to be, punished with a big red mark.
Which is a huge relief, honestly.
Instead, they are treated as logical extensions of a person's limited experience.
Okay, give me an example.
If a student thinks heavy objects fall faster than light objects, that isn't a stupid guess. It's an intuitive mental model based on their daily observations of dropping a rock versus, say, dropping a feather.
Right, because of air resistance, which they don't know about yet.
Exactly. The misconception is valid scaffolding. It's a bridge that the educator must navigate to move the student from their current limited mental model to a more sophisticated one that actually accounts for that air resistance.
Wait, hold on. I have to push back here.
Sure.
I hear what you're saying about treating a student's intuition with respect, but if we don't teach kids the rigid, step-by-step, scientific method-like hypothesis, experiment, conclusion, doesn't science just become entirely subjective? If a kid's misconception is treated as valid scaffolding, How do we prevent the whole thing from turning into a free-for-all where every random guess gets a participation trophy?
That is the essential tension of the whole curriculum, and it's exactly why they explicitly target the linear checklist myth of the scientific method.
The linear checklist myth.
Yes, science is not subjective, but it is also not a rigid five-step path. It is an iterative process, and they use the history of cell theory to prove this to the students.
Right, the invention of the microscope.
Exactly. If the rigid scientific method were true, someone would have formed a hypothesis about microscopic cells and then purposefully built a tool to find them.
But that isn't what happened at all.
No. The invention of the microscope was a paradigm shift. The tool came before the scientific question.
Oh, wow.
It allowed humans to see the microscopic building blocks of life for the very first time, and that new observation completely shattered their existing mental models about scale.
The tool forced them to realize their old explanations were just dead ends.
Precisely. The evidence corrects the path, not a procedural checklist.
Right.
The goal of a teacher in this framework, or honestly any good leader managing a team, is not to act as an encyclopedia handing over the correct answer just to stop the guessing.
Then what is the goal?
The goal is to facilitate the iteration until a person becomes dissatisfied with what they can explain.
Dissatisfied with what they can explain. I love that phrasing. When your mental model can no longer account for the data right in front of you, that friction forces you to seek a better explanation.
It is the engine of all scientific discovery.
So we have this beautiful philosophy of iterative, sense-making science. But again, how do you actually manage a classroom of 30 12-year-olds doing this without it devolving into absolute chaos?
It's a fair question.
That's what brought me to the Bioforge curriculum sources, because it shows us the mechanics of how this is actually executed.
Bioforge is a masterclass in applying these theories practically.
So to set the scene for the listener, Bioforge is a 7th grade life science course, but it transforms the classroom into a combination of a laboratory, a design studio, and an ecological research field station located in Homer, Alaska.
Right, it's totally immersive.
The students aren't passive learners, they act as the eco squad. And right at the center of this narrative is an artificial intelligence named Lumen.
And Lumen is a fascinating narrative device.
Lumen really is fascinating because Lumen is intentionally broken. The narrative states that Lumen was damaged. It can do some things really well, like it can translate complex technical data, it can store evidence the students find, and it can generate divergent questions to provoke new ideas.
But Lumen cannot give the students the answers.
Right. The AI is programmed to be incapable of telling the eco squad which scientific claim is actually correct based on logic alone.
Yeah.
It cannot replace their firsthand sensory observation.
Which is so brilliant.
But why build an AI just to cripple it?
Because Lumen represents the proper ethical role of technology in human sense-making. It is a tool for cognitive augmentation, not a replacement for human judgment.
Oh, I see.
By making Lumen broken in this specific way, the curriculum forces the students to do the heavy lifting. They have to observe, build models, and argue from evidence themselves.
Right. If Lumen just gave them the answer, the sense-making chain would be broken instantly.
Exactly. It is the ultimate antidote to the modern temptation of just asking a chatbot to write your essay or solve your problem. Lumen flat out refuses to do it.
And this curriculum uses this setup to instill 4 recurring moves that guide the students. They call them the Bioforge moves.
Yes, these are the guardrails that prevent the chaos you were asking about earlier.
Okay, so first is notice, carefully observe before you rush to an explanation. Second, build and test ideas. So ask, model, measure, and analyze.
Right.
Third, revise with evidence. Treat your first ideas as drafts. And finally, preserve the receipts. Keep a record showing what you observed and how your thinking changed over time.
Notice how those 4 moves directly tackle some massive societal myths, too.
Like what?
Well, they bust the myth that biology, or any science really, is a solved problem.
Ah, yeah.
Trustworthy science is not science that never changes. Science is a way of knowing that is always open to revision. If an explanation fails, new inquiry provides the evidence to fix it.
They also tackle the myth that technology is somehow separate from or replaces nature.
Yes, absolutely.
The Bioforge reality check is that technology and engineering involve designing solutions that arise from phenomena. The tech interacts with the ecosystem. It doesn't replace the phenomena itself.
But this brings us to the ultimate question of the curriculum.
Which is?
If Lumen isn't giving the answers and the students are constantly revising their ideas, how do they actually ensure that what they're figuring out is trustworthy?
Right.
How do we know the eco squad isn't just talking themselves into a collective delusion?
Yeah, if you drop 30 kids in a room and tell them to figure out an ecosystem, you need a mechanism to separate fact from fiction. And that brings us to the deeply human philosophical protocols of the Bioforge mission.
Exactly. Protocol 1 is the evidence protocol.
And what does that entail?
It asks the central unit question. How do scientists build explanations that are trustworthy, even though scientific knowledge can change?
And the answer Bioforge provides is that science becomes trustworthy when people make their observations, their methods, their uncertainties, and their revisions completely visible for others to examine.
Which is why the myth of the lone genius is so dangerous.
Because it hides the process.
Yes. In the Bioforge theater of operations, the lone genius cannot exist. Strategic environmental inquiry requires diverse lenses. The sources frame collective inquiry as the absolute only path to systemic understanding.
Why is that mechanically necessary, though?
Because a single person's limited experience naturally produces those misconceptions we talked about earlier.
Oh, right, the scaffolding.
Yeah. You might observe the bread rising and think, invisible bakers. I might observe it and think trapped heat.
Right.
We need a diverse team examining the exact same phenomenon through varied conceptual frameworks to spot the errors, cross-reference the data, and build a model that actually survives scrutiny.
Okay, but let's talk about the human friction here.
Yeah.
Human nature is tricky, especially in middle school.
Oh, absolutely.
If you have all these different students arguing over evidence, challenging each other's mental models, and exposing uncertainties, how do you prevent them from just shutting down?
It's hard.
Like, if my theory about the bread is proven completely wrong in front of my peers, my instinct is to either fight you on it or just stop participating to protect my pride.
That is the most critical hurdle in any collaborative environment, and Bioforge solves it through two highly specific practices.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first is low-stakes iteration.
How does that actually work in the classroom?
They use field journals that are strictly ungraded.
Really?
Ungraded, yes. This is a designated safe space for messy thinking and cognitive risk-taking.
Ah, I see. It separates the cognitive risk from the social penalty.
Exactly. By removing the grade, you drastically reduce what psychologists call ego protection.
That makes so much sense.
Right. If I know I'm not being graded on my very first draft, I don't feel the need to defend it to the death just to save face. I can afford to let the evidence change my mind because my initial thought was just a draft.
Yeah.
The raw field notes eventually become formal, graded Bioforge reports, moving from personal rehearsal to professional evidence. But that initial space requires absolute psychological safety.
That makes total sense. If it's just a draft, I'm not a failure for changing it. I'm just updating the map. And what's the second practice?
It's a core routine they call the sit spot.
The sit spot. Okay, what is that?
It is a deliberate practice of embodied learning and mindfulness. The cadets are required to physically slow down.
Slow down how?
They take time to literally smell the soil, to listen to the movement of the tide, to observe the micro movements of an insect.
Oh, wow.
The curriculum recognizes that slowing down to process raw sensory input is the vital first step in creating a permanent, trustworthy scientific record.
Because if you're rushing...
Exactly. You cannot make sense of a complex system if you are rushing to the finish line just to get a grade. You have to sit in the friction of observation.
So what does this all mean for us, for you, listening right now?
Yeah.
We've traveled from statewide policy documents to an immersive AI-assisted field station simulation. But the through line is incredibly clear.
It is.
Trustworthy knowledge is not a rigid list of unchanging facts you memorize for a test. It is an iterative, collective, and observable process.
And when we face information overload or complex problems in our own careers, we have to remember that changing an explanation when the evidence changes is not a weakness.
Right.
It is the fundamental strength of the scientific process. Our initial misconceptions are just the scaffolding we use to build a better understanding.
We also need to be careful about the lumen we use in our own lives.
Oh, definitely.
We need tools and colleagues that ask us challenging questions and force us to do the heavy lifting of sense-making, rather than just feeding us the easy, fast answers we want to hear.
Collective inquiry, visible evidence, and a willingness to revise. That is how you build a trustworthy model of the world.
Which brings me to a final thought I want to leave you with today. We've talked a lot about teaching 12-year-olds how to update their mental models when they encounter new evidence. But think about the digital tools you interact with every single day.
Right.
Think about the algorithms curating your news feed, or the search engines prioritizing your results. They are not designed like Lehman.
not at all.
They are not designed to challenge your mental models or force you to investigate dead ends. They are explicitly designed to feed you information that seamlessly confirms what you already believe. So the provocative question is this: are our own technological tools actively preventing us from doing the very sense-making we're trying so hard to teach our children?
That's a vital question for all of us to consider.
And think about your own daily routine. In a world obsessed with instant answers and rigid checklists, where is your sit spot? Where in your life are you allowing yourself the low-stakes space to slow down, observe without rushing to a conclusion, and just figure out how the mechanism of your world actually works? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.